Welcome, one and all. Fashion. It's what separates us from the animals. You'll never see an ostrich wearing pants. It restricts their movement. It's impractical, and I imagine they enjoy the cooling airflow. Anywhere you get sapients, they festoon themselves in some way, and when they ornamentalize themselves, they do so with clothing. It can say a lot about you, different cultures. They have long-lasting traditions about professional outfits and norms, from luscious flowing ball gowns to trim militarized suits. There is much that your clothing says about you and your world. And that's what we want to talk about here today. Welcome to the Worldcraft Club, a show for writers looking to create rich, immersive worlds to draw their readers in time and time again. I'm your host, James, and I've gathered some chic geeks to wax lyrical about the tutorial. And we'll kick it off first with Mev. How you doing, Mev?
Hey, doing well, James.
And Zoe. Steph.
Hello.
And Rach.
Hello.
Perfect. Sizzling. All right, so let's kick us off. First, we're going to do like a bit of a potpourri. I've been thinking about this a little bit, so it's basically, where have we seen clothes that we kind of wish were real, and maybe a few that we're pretty glad aren't. All right, Mev, you want to go for us? What do you got?
Okay. So, I've been obsessed ever since I played the games, the newer games of Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, because the whole style that they put in, apparently they got like a fashion designer that's prolific in kind of the techwear scene, but like along with him they have like devised this blend of modern and Renaissance. So they kept like advertising as Neo-Renaissance. So you got kind of like the Elizabethan collars, the poofy shoulders, the faux kind of dresses, even in a business wear. And that is usually kind of like the upper class has this kind of vibe to it. Yeah. The lower class are still kind of like, modern-y, and because they kept function. They kept function in mind with it, but that's always what I think too. For something, for a fashion
I feel like that is the danger of the things you wish that were real with this, and I'm taking it with that. You're kind of looking at it and being like, yeah, I want that. And like the reality is we can always make it real. We would just be the only ones.
Yeah.
Right? Like you could just turn up to work and like with a ruff. And that could just be how you're doing it. But it's like we really need everyone else on board. It's almost like when you're wishing it was real, you just really wish everyone was doing it. Is kind of the actual like thing. I like that. So they didn't go with the neo-militarist kind of vibe then. It was like a little bit. It sounds like they went a little bit fanciful, because usually with cyberpunky stuff, they're like very trim, sort of imperial chic.
Yeah, they kind of, with this like neo-Renaissance kind of deal with it, they also had this kind of I don't know if it's low res, but definitely geometrical. So some of the more outlandish, this military boss that you fight, she has the poofy skirt. The poofy shoulders, sleeves, but they're kind of geometrical, like sharp edges. With it, just to kind of like, she's a little more unstable or whatnot, because you kind of get that kind of comes through with the fashion.
I like that. And what's one you think we could all do without?
Okay.
If you can think of one. This one's
I actually thought of two. I think as much as I love pulp and, writers that want to do this with their completely fictional world, fine. But I think one thing that just does not translate to everyday wear for now is everything in Princess of Mars.
What? Just like loincloth and metal bikinis? Not for you?
For those that aren't familiar, it's basically all the guys look like they came out of the movie 300. They dress like Spartans. And all the women are Princess Bikini Slave Leia. Yeah. Basically. And so, like, I get it. It's Mars. It's hot. It's pulpy. It's fantasy. Do whatever you want. probably not good for like everywhere here on Earth. That and from the anime Kill la Kill, probably don't want them because apparently all the clothes are literally evil parasites. So light spoilers.
I like that. I think that's a good way to go. It's kind of like the Venom suit. It's like it's one fashion thing I wish wasn't there because you have to be bonded with a symbiote in order to make it happen. All right, Steph, what you got?
So I love the clothing in Arcane.
Oh yeah.
Because like the upper class Piltover wear is like really practical, sophisticated is how I would describe it, right? Like everyone's wearing clothes that look comfortable and stylish, but they're not like crazy ball gowns. They're not like over busy with ruffs and cuffs and
Yeah,
stuff. But like
yeah.
there's the little bit of frill, there's the little bit of contrast, there's the little bit of detail, right? Just enough to make it look interesting and intricate, right? It's a very sophisticated style, and I'm always in for that like slightly steampunky classiness. I'm always good for that.
I also like the way they simultaneously make Kate adorable and threatening.
Right. Yeah, like
It's like a good combo.
the military uniforms look extremely responsible while still looking very proper, right? I'm super great with that.
Yeah.
So and like the two-tone vests and all the intricate trimming and stuff.
I love it.
As far as stuff that I don't want to exist, it's funny that Marcus said what he said because of Princess Leia's slave bikini was one of the only things that really popped into my head. I'm like, that looks extremely uncomfortable and impractical. But for writers, the worst fashion is the stuff that I don't know about. I want you to tell me what your clothes look like. Right? You can say he's in a white tunic and brown slacks. That's fine. But give me more. Like, tell me...
Give you something.
Yeah. I love details, and, like, the more details you go into, I will revel in how you're describing your clothing if you want to go the extra mile to describe your clothing.
I love it. Excellent. The worst clothing is the clothing that remains undescribed.
Yeah,
I like that.
I don't mind filling in the blanks, but you know, I want to know what you're picturing.
Yeah. All right, Rach, what you got?
I think the fashion in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure should be real. They're amazing. They're so. The author of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the manga and the anime, is heavily inspired by 80s and 90s like runway fashion, and a lot of their a lot of the main characters' clothings heavily reference who they are and what their stands are, which, if you're not familiar with JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, they're kind of like a metaphysical extension of the person. So, but they usually look different and more alien, robotic. So whether it's like referencing their name or a specific like catchphrase that they say, a lot of the times their clothing, the main character's clothing represents themselves and or their stand. As also a lot of times the stands or the characters are named after like very prolific like fashion houses or foods or music albums and bands. And so sometimes that also influences stuff.
I like that.
And then
now, was there anything, any on the dark side of the coin?
You're gonna
What's
think I'm
something you wish?
crazy. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
It's just the same one. Yes. Like, this shouldn't be real, but I love it.
There's a joke in the fandom saying that how do people, a lot of the times in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, it talks about how stand users, which aren't the entire world, is a select few that just happen to become stand users, they often are attracted to each other, kind of, and you might not know who they are. And so there's this running thing in the show where they're trying to find out who's a stand user in their area. And you go through the crowd, and then there's one person in a ridiculous ass costume. I'm sorry, ridiculous costume. And they're like, who's the stand user? I can't tell. Who is it?
I can't tell.
It's the person wearing the zippers everywhere. How do you not know that that's Bucciarati? Actually, Bucciarati introduces himself, so actually you won't be trying to find Bucciarati. But anyways, that's purely why. That is purely why. The people in that world are not aware that everyone who's a stand user dresses really crazy. Who else has a giant yen symbol and a giant dollar bill on both sides of their collar of their school uniform? That's not school issued.
Obviously.
That's custom made.
I love that. So, we'll jump into our first sort of real question for the evening. And that's this. How do you feel fashion enhances a setting? So some background for the question in some ways is that I think you're going to have a lot of folks who may actually come at this and literally go like, I have never thought very hard about the clothing my characters wear. This is sort of your opportunity in some ways to say, you should really be thinking about it. Here's what it does for me. Here's what it shows me in the setting. All right. So I'll kick off with Mev. Go for it.
So I think it's been mentioned before, just earlier now, kind of alluded to. Fashion in a setting is that. It's another element of your setting. You have your establishing shot of your kingdom, your town, your city, whatever your protagonists are in, and you get a glance at the architecture. Fashion is going to tell you about the people. What district of the city are we in? Are we in higher class? Are we in lower class? Is this a very fancy, very luxurious kind of populace that we're seeing? Is this the very functional brass tacks, nothing to, or is this like we kind of put together what fashion it is? It may be like belt straps and something that looks like a garbage bag, but we fashioned it to look fancy,
Derelict.
He's absolutely right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's going to give you a lens to look at the people.
Yeah. I love that. The other thing I thought about as you were saying that is that it's also contemporary. Architecture tells you about history. Fashion tells you about what's happening right now. Which is just like, I don't know, kind of a neat thought. I like that comparison with architecture. All right, so Zoe, what you got?
Okay, can you guys hear me? I'm just making sure.
After yeah.
Kick me out. Okay. I think fashion is really important, especially when it comes to setting tone in either like a written format or a visual format, because it gives you a lot of information about the kind of social statuses of people. It tells you about like the conditions that they're in, that people are in, how many people are dressing nicely, who are the people that are dressing nicely, is fashion even important to everybody, or do they just not really care at all? I think another point also is that it kind of gives you an idea of like the mood also. Like usually characters in more colorful and bubbly cute outfits, you kind of expect like, okay, this is probably going to be a cute bubbly show, but then you get stuff like Madoka Magica that kind of flips that idea on its head with all these cute frilly anime girls killing each other and stuff like that. So it's interesting to either take that and emphasize tones and moods in your piece, or to use fashion to your advantage and throwing people off.
I love that. Yeah, contrasts or that really, really suits. I like that a lot. All right, Steph.
I am going to give a shout out to one of Worldcraft Club's favorites, Andor. Because they really nailed the 70s retro-futuristic vibe of Andor to make it feel classic Star Wars. right? They
Yeah.
do the same thing in Rogue One, where they let the guys have mustaches. They really like try to make the suits look really accurate, like the flight suits and the imperial military uniforms and the entire like governmental organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Andor takes it a step farther, where you see the stark white of the like Imperials, and they're like very specific, clean, pristine sort of vibe. And it really shows like sort of the disparities, right, with all of the poor people and their like rundown clothes. And when they're in Cassian's hometown, whose name escapes me right now, and all the people wearing, they're just like normal, rustic sort of. It feels very Star Wars, like all the way to the end. And I think they do a really good job of selling Star Wars as a setting by being really true to the classics there.
I really like that. So the fashion was a marker for you that said like this is what I remember, and it sticks out.
Yeah, it's loyalty to the source, right? They're not pulling from nothing. They're pulling from like the history of Star Wars lore, and they stay really true to that. And
Labor of love.
yeah, I'm a sucker for historical fashion in general. So like again, anytime something is like, yeah, this is set in the 1850s, and they are very careful to make it 1850s specific fashion, right? Not like 1870s kind of bleeding backwards. And because it's hard, right? The period from like 1800 to 1900, the changes in women's clothing were so drastic in that 100-year period that like trying to nail even a specific decade is tricky. So
I really like that. All right, Rach, what's on your mind?
I kind of the same, similar things to what Mev was saying. I think, but going more on cultural sides, more global sense of the world, fashion can tell you a lot about a person who has is a part of a certain country or a certain part of the world, or spent a lot of time in that world. As you can usually tell who a person who a person is, or what or where a costume piece is from, just by looking at it. And that tells you a lot about how a culture has very specifically developed their economic system, their values. Are they more conservative? Are they heavily religious based? You can also a lot of times tell if one of your friends just got back from a vacation somewhere international, because they're usually wearing the clothes that they just got from that place. But even like on the material level, Chinese silk and Chinese embroidery is not the same as any silks that were probably industrially made in England, nor is it the same embroidery as English embroidery. Even from the like French chinoiserie, it's inspired by Chinese aesthetics, but you can still tell it's not Chinese. So, or even sometimes there's some cultural things that get lost over time. For example, there's specific types of patterns and sewing techniques that are used in traditionally Indian cloth that were used a lot in British clothing, specifically, women's dresses during the colonization of India. And over time, general masses forgot that piece of that kind of patterning is originally Indian and only associated with British clothing, not knowing that it is in relationship to colonialization. So, I don't know, I'm big on culture and international stuff for clothing. That's probably what I'm going to focus on the most today.
Yeah. No, I really like that, and it's interesting. You all gave like very, I think actually very varied perspectives on the use of it, but it gives a sense of people and it gives a sense of place and culture where just architecture, for example, like I liked Mev kind of opening this up, comparing it to something that is consistent and stable like architecture, but saying like the clothes really show this sort of contemporary movement of people and set a place in the now in the world. And I think there's even room to be like to have like that contrast between elements of your setting, like more permanent things like architecture, bureaucracy, loads of other things, long-standing traditions, and contrasting them with the clothing people are wearing. You know, if you have a very staid religious culture and you have a youth movement that is just extremely, you know, quite gregarious and like frivolous, like you can show that contrast and be very economical in your word usage. You know what I mean? Like you can set a scene and you can set conflict immediately with that. I really like that. That's super cool. That's a lot of wow. That's really, sorry. I am one of those people that just never thinks about fashion at all. So it's like, this is just really enlightening to me. So it's, yeah, no, it's really useful. I like that, guys. Thank you. Yeah,
can I actually
please
add a point to Steph about how Andor brought back the original like 70s kind of fashion looks that they were using in Star Wars? I think that was really good on Disney to do that, because identity through fashion in a media is very iconic. Because you could see somebody just like dressed up as a generic Jedi, just like an OC they made, for example, and they just want to wear the robes. You know they're a Jedi. You see the lightsaber, you see the robes, you're like, that's Star Wars. Because you don't even need to have a specific character in mind that's like super iconic looking or whatever. But just the general aesthetic and identity of a series through their fashion, I think, is very vital to a series, and it should be emphasized, especially in visual mediums.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It identifies a world, not just characters. One of the things that we talk about a lot is when you're cosplaying, one of the things I find interesting is that sometimes you got to cosplay a character. It's harder to cosplay the world. But there are some worlds that are so well designed that, like, you can cosplay in the world and people are like, you're just a person from that world. You know what I mean? And it's like that. Yeah. That's a distinctive world. Yeah, no, that's really, really cool. Like it's yeah. That's a gold point. I love that. Okay, so where have you seen, this is our second question, by the way. Sorry, I'll just introduce this. Where have you seen fashion well articulated in a setting? When was fashion particularly impactful in a setting that you enjoyed? And I think we've sort of touched a little bit on this with our intro questions. So, like, you know, have a think about it, and we'll kick it off with Mev. Where has it particularly impacted you and sort of altered your way of imbibing the content?
So I'm usually introduced into a show or genre through like the action, the visuals of the setting, or a trailer of some sort.
Yeah.
There's one genre that came up recently for me, and the main draw that pulled me in was the fashion.
Yeah.
And it is the relatively recent genre. Mainly, I've seen it in the mobile game space. The genre of urban fantasy. Not to be confused with urban supernatural, which is a little more gritty. Urban fantasy is a very colorful, very, you have the urban culture, but now you're introducing magic, you're introducing the mythological beings, and so on and so forth. And just a little more over the top, a little more fantastical, with a dash of whimsy. Most recently, I think Zenless Zone Zero, is it? The Triple Z game is the most recent iteration of this urban fantasy kind of look. What introduced me to it was another mobile game called Dislight. Oh my goodness, all the character designs of that. Each character is a person in the world, but they inherited the powers of gods across different cultures. So you have this kind of very modernized interpretation of these gods inhabiting these people from different cultures. So you have to like this is an Egyptian god, which is very different from the fashion of the Chinese god, and you get that across. But then different, you get different twists on stuff, and you're like, yeah, I could see Hera having a huge huge rimmed hat, and kind of looking like a fashion designer, and she has the peacock's feathers on her lapel and everything. But this is like stuff that I believe has had roots in like Jet Set Radio, that kind of very colorful, urban, outlandish, living, very visually loud. And I've just kind of been fascinated. But yeah, that's the genre that drew me in from the fashion.
Yeah. Literally just the look of it. Mm-hmm. I like that. All right, Zoe.
Okay, I have two. I think the Hades series does a really good job at emphasizing, like, because all the characters are based off of Greek mythology gods, and you know exactly what the characters are supposed to be, and they include all these little details about their domain that I really like, and little details from their actual mythologies that I really like. Like, I sent this in our Discord earlier of Hecate. They included these really cool pauldrons on her. Not, is that the right word? Pauldrons for shoulder things.
Shoulders? That sounds right to me, but I know
where
nothing.
It's faces on her shoulders, because she is known in mythology as the three-faced goddess also. So instead of giving her like three faces, they gave her this armor that kind of represented that, which I think is really cool. Same, another Hera is that she has this like bridal veil crown that's made out of peacock feathers, and she's got this whole peacock color scheme. It's very pretty. But something where I think fashion is articulated particularly well is in the Hunger Games series.
Yeah.
And bringing up that who is wearing fashion, who has the time to think about dressing up and being fashionable, versus who has to be practical and just wear something that they don't care about and can get dirty. You can immediately identify the people from the capital because they're always wearing something crazy, because they don't have anything to worry about. Only thing they have to worry about is what they're wearing in the next hour. And they even talk about it during the tribute parades, where the children that are dressed up to be paraded in front of the Capitol people are wearing their fashion, and it's very foreign to them because they've never considered wearing anything like this before. It never mattered to them because they were just trying to survive. And I think that is a really cool articulation of fashion and who can worry about fashion, and how it's a privilege to worry about it versus just surviving and being at the mercy of the Capitol.
I like that. I think it's really good because she also develops a very close relationship with Cinna, I believe, her fashion designer.
Yes.
Which is like a really interesting, it's an interesting relationship and dynamic that I think is just, that's really cool. Yeah, who can worry about it? I often think sometimes, like, if you just want like a character to stand out, just have them dressed like to impress. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like, it's
Effie Trinket is an icon.
She is, and actually a sympathetic character, if I recall, like in the way the show goes, which is like neat. It's not just but it's clear. I think it was Suzanne Collins, right, who wrote that, who had just a clear interest in fashion that she wanted to share in that story. I really like that. All right, Steph.
I'm gonna give like a whirlwind of bizarre examples.
Perfect.
So first, I want to talk about My Little Pony: Friendship is Magic. They don't wear clothes ever, except when it's fancy, and then they wear the best clothes. There is very little in between, right? Like, they wear no clothes at all, or they wear these like super elaborate gowns. And I actually bring that one up specifically because one of the characters, Rarity, is a clothing designer. And, like, so she has fashion as sort of like her main archetype, right? Like her lifeblood, her passion is making clothes in a society that really doesn't wear clothes very often. I love the way her character is explored, and about how she has this passion for something that is essentially a frivolous eccentricity, and something that's completely not necessary.
Yeah.
I wanna talk about the old M. Night Shyamalan movie, The Village. Spoilers. Sorry if you've not seen this movie. It's old. You should have seen it by now, or don't. I don't
Yeah.
care. So the Village is presented to you like it's gonna be this like historical drama, right? Like they have these old timey clothes. I went
Yeah.
into that movie personally waiting for them to tell me what year it was so I could judge how accurate their historical costumes were. But they never
Yeah.
gave me a year. So I just assumed they were Amish. And so when the plot twist was that it was modern day, I was like, "Oh, this is unsurprising." So I feel like that one maybe wasn't as impactful as it could have been, because the clothes were just sort of simplistic country wear. I had one more. Dang it. Oh, Muppet Christmas Carol. The Muppet Christmas Carol is
That's
amazing
perfect.
because
Yeah.
there's like tiny little Victorian outfits on little rats and frogs and stuff. And it is just so wonderful that they took the time to make individual little vests and individual tiny ascots for all of these little puppets. And the clothing in the Muppet Christmas Carol is spectacular. And
Yeah.
just really look, just like pick an NPC, pick any character in that show, in that movie, and just like look at how intricate and detailed it is. Like the costumes in that are top tier. Very
Labor of love.
immersive, like Dickensian setting.
I love it. All right, Rach, what's on your mind?
So, similar to my predecessors, I have more than one. I'm sorry, I can't go.
Do it.
But they both,
Do it.
they both are to kind of supplement the same argument of we are the products of and also enforcers of our environment. The TV show Foundation and the TV show Game of Thrones have brilliant costumes. In Foundation, a futuristic show based off of the Isaac Asimov series, does a wonderful job not only giving you the general gist of what each planet faces, like geographically, politically, socially, religiously. For example, one of our many main characters, Gale, she originally is from a heavily flooded, water-based planet. So a lot of the costumes when we were on that planet, I adored because they're all waterproof clothing or very flowy clothing. So there was a lot of jackets that were made out of like plastic and other plastic-like materials that are just reminiscent of like umbrellas and life preservers and just but they're really intricate and still showed you a futuristic aspect, as well as like individual characters and character design aspects of the three empires,
Cleons.
the Cleons, exactly. How each one, they're all the same clones of each other, just at different ages. However, each one specifically has designs that kind of reiterate who they are and show you who they are. For example, Dawn, the youngest one, is often in really light blues, baby blues, showing his youth, his naivety, while Day, who's the main one, he's bold, he's abrasive, he has the boldest color of royal blue presented to you. And then Dusk, is the older one. He's wiser. He's lived out his years. He's going to be in a little bit more comfortable, richer clothes. You'll see him in velvets and stuff, and darker clothes, or more of a turquoise color. and their original one, his main costume looks very Pope-like. It's golden, it's not blue at all, and it kind of shows like how he's a kind of a deified creature, the way that he put on a clone dynasty, and he's the original one. Similarly, Game of Thrones, kind of, it's more of the reiteration of your environment and the enforcement of your environment, since there's so many like political marriages going on. A lot of people, a lot of the females of the show change their outfits a lot depending on who their alliances are. For example, Daenerys constantly changes her dresses and her uniforms depending on which different kingdom and empire she's visiting and trying to take control of, to try to align herself with them more. Cersei when she's a queen, and just like the wife of the king, versus when her children are dying. If you haven't seen the show, her children are dying. Putting more of a mourning outfit on, as well as something that has a resemblance to armor, because she's about to go kill a whole bunch of people. It's very reminiscent of the Renaissance for me, where a lot of the Western countries are in a conversation with each other, and their clothing is almost the same thing across the board, but there's ever so slightly modifications between each country that'll let you know immediately that's not British Renaissance Elizabethan clothing or Tudor clothing. That's gonna be from a different European country. For example, like the Tudor hood is originally an adaptation of the French headband hood. If you are familiar with like this headband thing from the Tudor era, for James mostly, as a non-fashion guy, it's a headband thing. It's a headband thing that also sometimes has like a piece of fabric in the back. It's originally a French piece of fashion that I believe got brought into and adapted in British clothing, because Anne Boleyn originally was like sent to the French court at one point to learn a little bit more, grow, and then she came back, married Henry VIII, etc., and that was a fashion piece that I believe got very popularized and adapted. So, yeah, culture, man.
That's rich. No, I love that. I think it's interesting seeing again all these different kind of contrasting views. Like I'm seeing kind of a pattern though, pattern fashion, kind of come together in a lot of this though, and it's fascinating to hear it. Now, the last kind of two questions, I'd originally posed them as two, but I'm sort of going to combine them here because I think there's just enough of a similarity in character as we sort of wind down. But what are some things you wish authors would try when discussing fashion in their settings? And what, if you can think of any in particular, are some sort of fashion words that you wish authors would use? It could be a color or a specific item of clothing that's just sort of under-leveraged and underutilized. And you can kind of like throw some of this stuff at me, like things that you would really want to see. So, Mev, go for it. What you got?
All right, so I got two sides of this coin, kind of. The first side, which may be a little counterintuitive to what we like the details and descriptions and this rich kind of painting the picture of our worlds. I'm going to remind authors, even though I don't have very many words, like fashion words to give, I do have trauma that you can learn from. Kill your darlings. Don't forget that. If fashion, or a person's fashion, if you're in like an already medieval, an already steampunk, a setting that's already kind of we've seen and we kind of get, make sure you focus on things of a particular person's clothing or accessories that serves the character development or plot. Do they have a ring? Is it a wedding ring? Is it a royal ring? Do they have a locket? The readers are going to think, what's in that locket? Do they have a medal? You know, what does that medal mean? And, oh, they did what to earn that? You know, you can seed in without going about the regalia of it. Also, if as an author you don't have the words, you know, but, you know, there are some general fashion staples that go across fashion for you to describe your characters in. Who's in charge? It's usually the person that's wearing something that accentuates their shoulders. Broad, pointy shoulders usually have that's the corporate boss, or the very decorative kind of tassels coming out. That's the commander. Are they a big shot? They typically have a big collar, you know, whether it's a big captain coat or they're a jerk and they pop their collar up to appear more important than they are. Are they mysterious? They have a veil. They're doing something to obscure their face. Long robes, a trench coat, doesn't matter. These things are even different times. If they're modern wear or in the past. But if you do have the words and you want to describe this place, especially if you're making like a new world, you're thinking, you're like, I need to show these people what there are. Learn from my mistakes. You can get as descriptive as you want, but do not do so while undercutting the momentum / pacing of your storytelling. That is how I annoyed the majority of my fiction writing class, because I would be telling the story, a new character would walk in, and I would have a field day describing what this character was wearing, how this character had steampunk cybernetics, etc., etc. And it fatigued my audience, and everybody's just like, I just want to know what's happening. I don't need to know how this person is assembled, you know? So, you can still be descriptive, just lace action with the description. As they're walking in, the click-clack of their suede shoes, you know, echoes through the marble floor. They check the pocket watch that has the royal insignia on as they adjust their monocle. And you get, through the action, you're getting pieces of the description, so you're not halting the action to do the shopping list of what they're wearing. So you can get descriptive, just make sure you keep the pacing of your storytelling. And you can reveal function. If going back to Deus Ex Machina games, Adam Jensen, his jacket, not only fashion-wise, has, you know, the patterns of an upper-class corporate agent, you know. They built function into his jacket, which they don't explicitly say, but they show in action. So his jacket doesn't have zippers or buttons to fasten. They're magnets. But that is because in the middle of combat, if his jacket is pulling him back, he can just rip it off.
Yeah.
Do that in the action. If you have a hero that has a feature that's wearing that feature, don't say he put on his jacket, you know, and thankfully, you know, he thought good thing that the tailor put magnets in here because, you know, sometime in the future I'm going to need it. No. In the action, as he's under fire, the magnets come into play. He rips it off, and they're like, "Oh, his jacket has magnets, and that's why."
Yeah.
And your audience is still with you for the ride. So that's my advice. Just as you're describing, make sure you're keeping the pace of the storytelling.
I like that. That's very good. Very solid advice. I like that. Good insight. All right. Zoe, what you got?
So, I am primarily an artist, so most of my expertise comes in character design. But I also, for a time, was a fashion product photographer and a fashion data entry person. And in these data entry catalogs, I would have only like 50 to 60 characters that I could use to write out what a piece of clothing looked like. And then it would be uploaded to eBay to be sold. So something I suggest doing to make something kind of be easy to picture in somebody's head is scroll through eBay, try to find some like clothing that resembles what you're trying to describe, and kind of start plugging in some of the words you see most frequently, especially certain like eye-catching words that you're trying, like say you're trying to convey somebody who really likes a luxury, and you start looking at luxury sweaters, you're going to start seeing like certain fabrics popping up a lot, like cashmere and angora or mink type fabrics. Also talking about like, again, like trying to keep it condensed that we kind of talked about before, but still able to stick in somebody's memory. And even talking about like a little bit about the make of the clothes maybe would only be important if it's handmade. Like if you want to emphasize that somebody's wearing like a crocheted sweater and they're like, oh, my mom gave it to me, then that's an important tie. Their mom is important to this character, and they, to the point of dedicating enough time to their child to make them a whole sweater, because crochet takes a long time to do.
Yeah.
My sister crochets, and I know. So there's like all these little implications with like the makeup fabrics and the kind of like story that can be told within clothing, but also don't get lost in the sauce. Find some eye-catching words that are easy to kind of put in your mind's eye and to put in your reader's mind's eye, because not everybody's going to be able to like know the difference between like satin and silk. You can just choose, you can probably get away with one or the other and kind of go with that, and don't get too crazy about it.
Yeah, I like that. No, this is like Warcraft Club bingo card to some degree. It's kind of like less is more, kind of is like almost our motto with a lot of this. But I like that we're kind of dancing around it and trying to find where we can include it, because it's one thing is it's similar to me for food. Is like I've never read a book where I was like they spent way too long talking about food. I'm always like no more, because like I read Redwall and stuff and they'll talk about the feast and I'm just like you just keep going. I'm like don't stop. You know, I even have a book like that's a Christmas feast at Redwall, and like I just love reading it. So yeah, all right, Steph, I've got thinking about food now, but let's
no
talk
problem. To actually kind of segue off of something that Zoe said, you know, there are lots of cool fashion words that I love, but if you want to put them in your book, you know, if you're writing the kind of book where it's okay if people look up vocab words they might not know, you know, do that. But if you're trying to write like a sort of like a young adult novel or something that's pretty more simple, you know, there's you don't want to go too heavy on the vocab. Like I love a good peplum coat, but like if you use the word peplum in a story, some people might need to look that up because they don't know what a peplum is. I guess I kind of prepared for this question a little bit because I was like, what are the things that I really want to know about an outfit? And I think that there's like five things that I want to know, and it's hemline, waistline, neckline, sleeves, accessories. If you hit those 5 points, that tells me basically everything I need to know, right? Like, is it a long dress? Is it short pants? Right, there's your hemline. Is it high waisted? Is it an empire waist? Is it a drop waist? Right, that works for men or women. Do you have a high collar? Do you have a V neck? Do you have like a scoop neck? Do you have just straps? Are do you have long sleeves, short sleeves? Right, like that tells you, gives you really quick impressions. And then, you know, accessories, right? Like, do they have 10 belts for no readily apparent reason? You know, there are lots of cool kinds of hats, and you absolutely can do a Google search for types of hats, but, you know, most people aren't gonna know fedora versus trilby off the top of their head. So, like, you know, you can use common words like fedora, even if it's not exactly what you're describing, because it might be close enough. So yeah, with accessories close enough is good.
I
But-
like that. All right, no, that's really concise. Hemline, waistline, neckline, sleeves, and accessories, and you're good to go.
Yeah, just like
That's-
the different sections of the body, describe it. And
Yeah.
and you know, if you want to talk about color and fabric too, that can add. But you know, getting the shape of the garment, I think, really is the visual. And if you want to talk about, you know, rough versus soft textiles,
Yeah.
or you know, things like that.
That's perfect. All right, Rach, what you got?
I would like authors, writers, etc. to remember the age-old saying, "Show, don't tell."
Yeah.
I specifically want to cover if you're using a specific real-world culture as your influence for what a specific culture in your fantasy setting to look like, don't say that the clasps on someone's clothing is the Chinese frog clasp. Because people are not going to know that. And also, you don't want to say the Chinese frog clasp in your fantasy setting. So be more discreet. Please make it your own. Especially if you're not copying and pasting a culture, if you're taking heavy influence from that culture, or taking little bits and pieces of what their traditional clothing looks like. Describe that the clasp is like somewhat embroidered and it doesn't use any metal in order to secure it. Especially if it's going to be a piece of clothing that is very important to describe, to paint your character who represents that culture in a specific light. Likewise, don't be afraid to describe colors in more than just red, white, and blue. Please, when it calls for it, and in your writing, use more than just the basic color names, because even though the basic color names have a lot of associations with how a character can be, a lot of people, could know that like a blue color can mostly represent a studious but also calm kind of character, while red is always associated with very bold, possibly abrasive, aggressive kind of things. But when it calls for it, don't be afraid to describe it more. Not only do you have people who are colorblind, but also you have a wide palette to work with to tell you more about why this character is naive, why this character is jaded, etc., etc. So, don't do that when you're first introducing a character unless it really calls for it, because I don't think anyone's going to pay attention or will probably start rolling your eyes if you start describing how this coat is a specific type of turquoise variant, and each little piece of the jewelry and gems that are stitched into its waistline are, rubies and sapphires. I don't think people are going to pay attention to that unless it's actually very important to your scene. But, for example, if a character's falling in love with someone, they're going to start thinking about them in a very romanticized, frilly way. And that's a wonderful time to talk about how this character just noticed that how the collar on someone might be stitched with a red thread that contrasts well with the flesh of their skin or the cream color of their shirt. Who knows? I don't know. Don't be afraid. Go for it. Be bold. Be big.
And I think I also want to play off of that a little bit. You can even bring in maybe color references that people might more readily understand, like a sunset orange, or just a coffee tone, a coffee with creamer tone, or spinach green, stuff that's a little easy to kind of, especially if like what Steph said, if you are trying to write a more simple book that's you don't want people going to Google trying to understand well, what does burgundy mean? What does burgundy look like? You can just kind of describe it as like, well, let's just grab a food or a crystal or something that
something someone
something
would be
that
familiar
everyone
with.
has probably seen at some point.
That's a good idea.
That's an easy color to grab and just
And there's-
insert in.
Yeah, and like what Rach said, there's definitely fit for purpose fashion.
Yeah.
Right? Like the farmhand wearing a tunic and a short sleeve tunic and trousers, probably good. If you go to the queen's castle and you see her in a dress, she's not just wearing a red dress, right? You need to go big because the character is big, right? Like the clothing as you describe it should be very fit for purpose.
I love that.
I'll add what I want to encourage more for writers writing novelizations or visual. I appreciate whenever the character changes outfits.
Yeah.
Doubly if that the new outfit is a representation of their growth. I'm a little sick of like, oh, time has passed, they grew, ergo the length of their hair changed. You know?
Yeah.
You know,
They're
it's
wearing
like,
a beard now.
yeah, it's like, I've been dark and grizzly, so I have longer hair, a beard, or I'm you know, being free from my past, so I'm cutting my hair or whatever. I don't know. I see that a lot. I'm like, or you could just, you know, you can change their clothes because they're still wearing the same outfit. You know, so I liked they did with that, and this is kind of comes back around to what was mentioned of cosplaying as the world, and you like, oh, you're from this one. The Matrix does this, and with Neo from the first movie to the second movie, he's a little more just ragged, but now from the second movie he's a little more, you know, enlightened, so he has that kind of high collar. You know, not necessarily that he's higher class, it's much more of a spiritual enlightenment, you know, he's higher spiritual. But it's also, in the beginning of the second movie, they expanded on what was like Matrix fashion during the meeting of all the like ship captains, and you got to see just kind of, oh, they're not all wearing trench coats, they're not all even wearing sunglasses. I thought that was a staple, you know. But you can kind of pick out, you can, and what like Steph said for like high collars, what, you know, hemlines, what you can gather from the characters, you can kind of pick out who's the captains, like who has the high collar, you know, who, oh, that person doesn't really have much of anything, so they're of a lower standing, it seems, you know. So I always was fascinated with just like, oh no, you're dressing like you're from the Matrix, aren't you? You know, that was like another deal.
I want to do one quick plug as well for the Mistborn trilogy.
Yes.
The character of Vin does fashion changes throughout the course, and it's really important for her as a character. Like, her clothes are important, and I think they do a good job of that. But also specifically the mist cloaks are like one of this iconic garments in the book, and it talks about these strings of fabric that sort of hang, and like when they jump in the air, and how the strings sort of act as a distraction, and these beautiful ribbons, and I recommend Mistborn as another good like literary example of clothing in World.
Yeah, Sanderson likes to do that. It's similar for Stormlight Archives. I've been noticing reading through it. There's a lot of distinctions with fashion types, and I realized one of it is that there are a lot of the clothing buttons on the sides, but it's because of the high storms, right? Because it's blowing, and if it's blowing head on onto them, you don't want clothes that whip open, right? And I hadn't even thought of that until like I was just like reading it through. I was like, oh, I bet that's why they all button on the side. You know, it's like it would suck if you were in a storm and your clothing just kept whipping around you. But all right, look, I think I'll close this here. Basically, like what I'm hearing is that fashion kind of tells us a lot about the world that you're in and the setting that you're in. It contrasts and compares cultures. It provides a good way to understand a world in a given sort of time and place, but can even get as granular as explaining what a character's role is in a given setting. And it does it with a massive economy of words if used correctly, right? Like, it can also be completely, you can get out over your skis, you can get a little bit too deep into it, you want to kind of make sure you use that economy of words. You sprinkle it through the action. Make sure you are not interrupting your pace and flow, and that the things you're highlighting are meaningful. I also really liked Steph's kind of framework for like, these are the key things you need to know: hemline, waistline, neckline, sleeves, accessories. That actually, you can tell somebody's got short sleeves, they're working, right? Like, it's like, it's an interesting thing. It's like you start looking at any one of those and you start playing with all the different settings in the character creator in your head, and you'll start to realize, oh, actually, when you start messing with those 5 areas, you start to really get a picture of what someone's going to look like. But guys, this was a ton of fun. So from Mev, Zoe, Steph, and Rach, this has been another episode of the Worldcraft Club. Thank you so much for joining us. Fashion. It's what separates us from the animals. You'll never see an Auschwitz.
What? What came out of your mouth?
Try again.
Okay.
All right.
Reset.
3, 2, 1.
You're mistaken, indeed.